This is a story out of WDBJ 7, and this is Virginia, dated December 13th, 2017. Opioid plague is creating more grand families in Virginia. This is where the parents are either dead or messed up on drugs and in jail, and the grandparents step in to take care of the children. And we saw this during the crack epidemic. Let me go ahead and play this video.
Is touching thousands of families right here in our hometowns. Among the effects, tearing children away from their parents. 1 in 10 children are living in a home with a grandparent, often because of opioid addiction. In this week's early years, we're hearing from Virginia Tech researcher who spent nearly 20 years studying what are now known as grand families. Megan Dalban-McNabb is an associate professor at Virginia Tech. She says around 55,000 children in Virginia are being raised exclusively by their grandparents. About 40% of those are because of their parents' substance abuse.
We are seeing what we call skip generation households. So it's just the grandparents and their grandchildren living together in that home because the parents really aren't able to provide care for the grandchildren.
For some of these kids, they've never known any other parental figure except for their grandparents. The living arrangement is more difficult for kids who had to be removed from their parents' home.
And in those situations, children may come to their grandparent with a variety of different kinds of issues that they may deal with.
Dalban-McNabb says these kids often have behavior issues, but in the long run, they do better with their grandparents than other caregivers. There's more stability and more connections with other family members. It's a labor of love that often requires some outside help.
Many communities have support groups where grandparents can meet up with other grandparents and talk and share stories, share solutions to challenges, those types of things. There are resources through social services. Grandparents can apply for WIC benefits.
She adds that most of the children she's worked with are aware of the challenges their parents are facing.
And seem to understand that I can't be with my parent right now. And for that reason, often we'll talk about being very grateful for their grandparent being willing to take them in.
Yeah, it's just really difficult for everybody involved. You just heard these so-called grand families or skip generation families are a huge trend right now. But just like with kids in foster care, sometimes the kids can go back to their biological parents. But unfortunately, often with opioid addiction playing a role in this, they just can't.
Yeah. That's just a really hard situation. It's like you're caught in between a rock and a hard place.
Yes, it is indeed. And it's a huge issue right now, one that we're going to continue following. But you had some really good insight, I thought.
Yeah, really good stuff to say. Thank you so much, Kimberly.
Well, thank you so much for starting your book. It's touching thousands of families right here in our hometowns. Among the effects.
All right, y'all. It just looked like it's looping. All right. And as you can see, but we're familiar with this in the Black community. During the crack epidemic, a lot of grandparents and retired, sometimes both grandparents, the mother and father, were retired and they had to go back into parenting. In fact, I knew a few children that were being raised by their grandparents. We knew someone directly and in some cases indirectly. So it was a very prevalent thing. But in our case with the crack epidemic, those parents were in prison. And so the grandparents stepped up to the plate and didn't really get to enjoy their senior years because they were rearing small children again. So, now we're seeing this happen to the opioid addicts, and their children are now being raised by their parents. So now they're calling them grand families. Well, they didn't call them anything during the crack epidemic. You can clearly see differences here, but Virginia is saying they have about 55,000 children that are being raised by their not their great grandparents, their grandparents. And it's 40% of those children are with their grandparents being raised because of substance abuse. It's a shame, but this is almost like a cycle repeating itself because we saw it before. And now a big chunk of the white community, you're now feeling the effects of this. Please tell me what you think. Please leave your comment and subscribe, and don't forget to hit on that notification bell. Peace, family.